You're listening to the Vonu Podcast, the podcast making you invulnerable to the coercion of the state and the servile society. Visit our website for free resources to aid you in your pursuit of self-liberation, old Vonu publications, podcasts, guest articles, and much more. Go to vonupodcast.com. And now, your hosts, Shane and Jason.
Should probably unmute myself, huh? Might be a good idea. And welcome to the Vonu Podcast, the podcast making you invulnerable to the coercion of the state and the servile society. I'm your host, Shane, coming to you from the homestead, my Vonu home base here in southern Illinois. This podcast, everything found on the website, is covered by BIPCOT, no government license, still has reuse and modification to anyone except for governments and the bludgies thereof. Learn more by visiting bipcot.org. So this is a live stream, of course, so please, so feel free to leave any questions or comments in the live chat. I will be jumping up there and keeping tabs on that. So yeah, feel free to drop any questions or comments for me or my special guest today. But before I bring in my special guest this afternoon, I do have a couple quick announcements. First off, until January 1st, we are running a 50% off special for our proofreading and editing services over at Liberty Under Attack Publications. So if you're an author and have a manuscript you've been wanting to get a professional set of eyes on, we'd love to help. On the other hand, if you're a journalist and want another set of eyes on your articles, we can help with that too. Just email me, Shane at libertyunderattack.com, or visit libertyunderattack.com/publish for more information, or to schedule a strategy call. And you can also check out all of our books at libertyunderattack.com. We've got a dozen or so out right now, many of them on Vonu, all of them, if I remember correctly, on self-liberation. So yeah, if you dig the content of this podcast, you'll love our publications. And yeah, if you'd like to get a few free books to sample what we have to offer, just visit libertyunderattack.com and sign up for LUA Publications email updates. So yeah, on today's 65th episode of the Vonu Podcast, I'm joined by Frank Braun, another Cypherpunk crypto-anarchist out of Berlin. He is the host of the Cypherpunk Bitstream podcast with our friend Smuggler, and he is involved with at least two projects that we'll talk about today, Codechain and Scrit. We'll learn about what he's been working on and see where the conversation goes. So Frank, welcome to the Vonu Podcast, sir. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your cast.
Hey, not a problem at all. And just doing one more check. I don't see. I think we're coming through fine on the live stream. No drop frames as of yet. So things are actually going smoothly. That doesn't typically happen when I live stream. So that's. I guess it's a good time to do it. So yeah, Frank. So I guess we'll start with this if that's all right. Why don't you start with an introduction? Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I would call myself like a crypto-anarchist. I'm a software developer by trade, and interested in all things how we can create more liberty in our lifetime.
Very good. Yeah. So obviously, I mentioned Codechain and Scrit. Those are some projects that you're working on. So you're a coder, a developer. Then, what are your specialties? Programming languages, types of software, etc. Could you speak a little bit to your work?
Yeah, I'm mostly a software developer. I did a lot of C programming for probably 20 years, and then moved into Go programming language maybe 5 years ago, and that's what we've been using mostly for all our projects because it turned out to be much more productive.
Okay, very interesting. So Go's what you've been using then. I guess is there? I'm not a coder or anything myself, but I know just from some of the people that were liking and retweeting this, they might be interested in learning more. But yeah, Go. Why do you prefer Go over some other languages?
I think it's very productive. I mean, you don't really have any memory problems. It has memory collection. It has a good parallelization. It's just overall way more productive than C.
Okay.
It's really built for programming in the large, and it has a lot of especially for our interests, it has a lot of crypto primitives already built in. So you have very good implementations for all the different cryptographic primitives you need to implement things like Codechain or Scrit.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So, so Frank, I know I'm curious. I'm sure some others are as well. How'd you find yourself in the realm of crypto anarchy? I mean, what was your path here?
Um, I'm a bit of a late starter. I think I started getting interested in libertarianism maybe 15 years ago or so. Um, I mean, I started computer science. I was always interested in economics, but I wasn't really I didn't really like some things like that. I had to go to like that there's conscription in Germany, or there was at the time, and that I was forced to go to school. So I had like these feelings that I thought this is not right, but I couldn't like put a name to it. I didn't have any philosophy, and around 15 years ago, then I stumbled upon Ayn Rand, as many do, and that kind of started for me the journey, and fell in the rabbit hole. And then only later I brought this together with basically my background in computer science and how do we get to a world with more liberty. Then I brought this together with crypto-anarchy. Or to be more precise, I met Smuggler by accident, and he kind of got me hooked on crypto-anarchy. And then for me, it kind of came together as a strategy how we can achieve more freedom in our life. And also something where I could use my skills. I was also interested in seasteading, but I couldn't really see myself contributing that much because I wasn't a civil engineer and didn't have 20 million to build a floating platform.
Right, right. Okay, that's interesting. So you're into so you're interested in seasteading then. Yeah, that's been one of my dream lifestyles, I guess, is living on a sailboat. But yeah, I'm certainly interested in the prospects of seasteading as well. I think it's one step in the direction of space steading. And obviously, I don't think that's really going to happen in our lifetime. But I think when the crypto anarchists of the future can make their own space shuttles and take off. I mean, I think it'll be pretty impossible for governments to rule out in outer space. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, probably, yeah. I mean, I think that's a good strategy to try to build these alternatives somewhere, be it on the sea, be it in space, or also on land. I mean, that's what the second realm is about: building seasteads on land.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, building pockets of freedom and physical space and time. So you're in Berlin too. There with Smuggler. I guess I guess it would have been the last time he was on. Not the last time, but the first time he was on. He talked a little bit about the temporary autonomous zone. That's that I guess is functioning. So do you want to talk a little bit about I guess a little bit about the Taz kind of crypto anarchy in Berlin? What you guys got going on there?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if the listeners are familiar with the concept of the second realm. Maybe shortly I can introduce it. So
Sure.
It's about building like these parallel spaces in the physical realm. And we've been talking about this for a long time. And then we had this idea that we want to build such a parallel space, or so-called temporary autonomous zone, out of shipping containers. The main reason was that if you ever have to change places, then with shipping containers you can do that easily without losing your property. And so I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, we started off with the first 2 shipping containers and rented some space and put them there. And then over time, got more containers, got more people involved, and now, like for the last year or so, it's been growing more quickly. And yeah, that's how we try to build our alternative space.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's incredible. That's incredible. And and I don't know if you've looked into Vonu at all, but the I guess the founder of the Freedom Strategy, Vonu, that was one thing that he recommended back in I guess the late 1960s was he was a big proponent of mobility. That mobility is what is makes you is mobility. I guess mobile lifestyles make one more invulnerable to the coercion of the state. And then also too, as you kind of said, with the state being a threat, obviously there's risk of confiscation. So if you have highly mobile capital, then that risk of confiscation goes down some.
Exactly, and then it's just a matter of what do you optimize for. I mean, some people are really into RVs, and I think RVs are a good thing, but they're optimized for moving them a lot. So it's kind of expensive to maintain this movability of an RV. I mean, it would be too expensive if it's in one place most of the time, and you cannot really stack. So that's why we went for containers, which are they're still optimized for being moved around, but you can also have them in one place for a long time, stack them, and it's very cheap compared to an RV fleet.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I mean, I'm a big proponent of van nomadism too, whether it's in an RV or in a car or in a work van, whatever it may be. But yeah, that's certainly good points. There's especially when it comes to I don't know. A lot of people like some sort of stability, right? So obviously mobility is important, which is why one reason you chose the shipping containers. But you also want some sort of semblance of stability, right? At least some people do. At least you want some sort of semblance of semi-permanence, right?
Exactly. In our case, that's what we optimized for. So I mean, I totally understand that if you want to move more often than an RV, might be the better choice, or it's probably the better choice. But in our case, containers were the better choice, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So, I guess let's go ahead and get into the first topic of discussion here, and that is Scrit Cash. Well, I guess before we get to Scrit Cash, I am curious because you and Smuggler, obviously your Cypherpunks, crypto-anarchists, you guys are living you're living this, and you're also software developers and all that good stuff. But I want to get your thoughts, the thoughts on the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space in general. So what do you think about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, just whatever you want to say.
I was very excited about Bitcoin when it came along. I think it's a very good step in the right direction, so to speak. But I also see a lot of problems. For example, the privacy aspects are not perfect yet, and it's quite expensive to make transactions. They're not that fast, and the biggest problems I actually see on the connection to let's say the regulated financial system, so exchanges and stuff like that. I think that's the weakest links we have right now in the cryptocurrency space, because that's where most of the regulations happens. Like when you want to get money in and out of Bitcoin, that's where most of the regulations happening, and know your customer rules, anti-money laundering, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that is a huge vulnerability. But as far as obviously a lot of people want mass adoption with Bitcoin, and for that to happen, I mean it's going to happen through the exchanges, right? There's no way to get everyone on a decentralized exchange, especially at this time. It's just so that's certainly a hurdle. Certainly a hurdle. As far as you mentioned some problems with Bitcoin privacy. Sure, yeah, I that's certainly the case. But what do you think about things like Wasabi and Samurai and some of these privacy tools that are coming out for Bitcoin? Do you think they're solved? Do you think the problems somewhat solved now? Where are we in that process?
I think things improved a lot with the two you mentioned. That helped a lot, but it's still far away from the theoretical maximum you can achieve in terms of anonymity.
Sure.
because you still have these coin joins, these sets of transactions where you that you use to mix. It's not that every coin or every UTXO is indistinguishable from every other. That's what we're trying in Scrit, is to have like real anonymous cash, and I think it's probably not doable with the blockchain. We tried for a long time to kind of build that concept of blind cash into blockchains, to come up with a design that does that, but I don't think that's possible. So that's where we kind of got back to a different approach.
Gotcha. And yes, we'll certainly get to Scrit Cash, but I have a couple other questions that came to mind there. So do you think there's
Sure.
so as far as gosh, where do I want to go with this? So yeah, as far as Bitcoin, do you still see it as being valuable, as serving some sort of purpose, towards maybe not crypto anarchist ends, but maybe general anarchist ends? Do you think it's yeah, I guess
Oh yeah,
I know
absolutely. Of
Smuggler
course,
expressed
of course.
some concern about the mutability of the blockchain, like it's there forever. So what do you think?
Well, I think it definitely serves a purpose, and it's very helpful that we have it. It's better than not having it. It's just that it's not enough yet.
Sure.
And yeah,
Okay. Very
I
good.
mean, it's
So
already great that you can, to some extent, take money out of the hands of the state by putting it in Bitcoin, and having it in a form that you can also send to other people over the internet. I mean, you can already, let's say, take money out by keeping it in cash or keeping gold coins, but Bitcoin kind of was one of the first systems that were totally separate and still allowed you to send money over the internet. And I think that's still a very useful case for Bitcoin, definitely. And with these new anonymizers, also privacy improved a lot. But like I said, there's also a lot to be that can be improved, like transaction costs, transaction speeds.
right.
And the price stability I think, is also a big problem for commerce. I know it's kind of fascinating or exciting for speculators, and I totally get that rush when your Bitcoin increases tenfold, But it's not really good for commerce when you take in Bitcoin and then you're exposed to this huge currency risk.
Yeah, that's I mean I yeah, so like I know the folks at Parallel Society in Prague. There was a talk that I watched on here on YouTube, where they talked about running a Bitcoin business, and how difficult it was. I guess that they've been able to figure it out up until that point, at least, and obviously still up to today. But yeah, I can imagine that'd be a pretty big hurdle, if if you make $2,000 worth of sales in a day, and then Bitcoin drops 20%. I can imagine that would be a problem. But I'm curious. I'm curious, Frank. What do you think about this idea of hyper Bitcoinization, where Bitcoin becomes the default default medium of exchange, where it's not U.S. dollars anymore, it's satoshis. Do you think that's a plausible future?
I don't think that's a plausible future. No, I think that's a bit too optimistic. I don't really see a path there from where we are right now. And it would require a lot of Bitcoin used for commerce and for actual payments. And to me, it seems like the whole narrative has changed to Bitcoin is now a store of value, and that, for me, it makes it even more unlikely that hyper Bitcoinization would happen, because it's still very few people actually using it.
Yeah.
But I might be too pessimistic, I mean, I'm happy to be surprised, but I just don't see it right now.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I'm hopeful. Obviously, I'm hopeful I'll see it in my lifetime. But Yeah, I mean, I'm not too optimistic about things in general. I mean, things have been going things have been going downhill and towards tyranny for longer than I've been alive, and I don't see that changing anytime in the near future. But doesn't mean we can't find personal freedom in the here and now. But it looks like here in chat, Bruno Ray said BISC is doing a lot to evade regulations via exchange. I'm somewhat familiar with BISC. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with what they're doing. But yeah, let me see here. So yeah, I guess good on good. Yeah, I like that answer for hyper Bitcoinization. I guess let's get to Scrit. Can you tell us a little bit about Scrit? What's Scrit Cash?
Well, Scrit Cash is a digital payment system, which is based on digital bearer certificates, and it's basically like a digital banknote, which you can use to pass around as digital cash. And the concept has been around forever, basically since the 80s when David Chaum invented it, and it allows to do very fast, very cheap transactions. And the biggest problem always was that you have some sort of centralized mint. And with the design of Scrit, you have distributed mints. So you get rid of that single point of failure, which can inflate money or steal the backing. And in Scrit, you kind of distribute that over a set of mints and have a payment system where you can have very fast and cheap anonymous transactions without a central mint. The biggest difference being to things like Bitcoin is that you cannot just become a mint. In Bitcoin you can basically just become a miner or run a full node without asking anyone. And in Scrit, at least as it's currently designed, the other mints have to take you on as a new mint. Because it's actually a very hard problem to have to be able that other mints can join without knowing who that person or that mint actually is. Then you open yourself up to civil attacks.
Okay. Interesting. So I know many of my listeners are familiar with Bitcoin. How a transaction works. You open up the wallet, you put in the address, you hit send, and then it gets sent. Could you I guess just walk us through how a transaction would look from a basic, I guess, UI perspective with Scrit?
Sure. So basically, you have a so-called DBC, which is digital cash. It's just a short string, and you could send that DBC to another person, basically like you would give him a banknote. But things being digital, of course, means that now the recipient and the sender both have a copy. So which is not like with physical cash, where when you give somebody a banknote, you don't have it anymore. But if you give somebody a DBC, you still have it. So then the recipient, in the normal case, the recipient talks to the mint and says, okay, here I have this DBC. Can you tell me if it is valid? And if it is valid, can you exchange it for a new DBC? And then the mint checks if this DBC is valid. That means it has not been spent before. If it is, then the mint marks it as spent and gives a new DBC back to the recipient. And that leaves us with the recipient having a DBC that the sender doesn't know, and the copy that the sender still has became invalid because it has been spent. That's the normal transaction flow when both parties are online. And then there are like more special types of DBCs, but that's the general flow. Was that clear? Or?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess as far as the mints though, I guess could you speak a little more to their role? I mean, would they basically just be in the Bitcoin system? They'd just be the miners. Could you speak a little more to, I guess, to their role? How do individuals sign up as mints? How do they prevent double spends? Could you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So what I just described, that was the centralized case with just a single mint, and basically the mint only has two operations. It an issue and a spend. So an issue means it just creates money. It signs a DBC, and a spend means it takes a DBC that is unspent and puts it in a so-called spend book and records that it has been spent. So that's the main data structure of the DBC, of the mint is the spend book, where the mint records all spent DBCs. And it has a signing key, and that's what it uses to issue DBCs. That's basically all. So there's no mining or something like that. In the case I described, the DBC comes in, mint checks if it is unspent, puts it in a spend book, creates a new DBC by signing it. And that's the whole operation. And then you can distribute that case over multiple mints. That means when you have a DBC, that it's not just signed by one mint, but it is signed by a quorum of mints. And in order to be valid, you have DBC needs enough signatures. And then there's also the other question of, do you want to have a backing or do you want to have no backing? So because like a single mint, you can just create DBCs, you can just sign them. But if you want to have a backing, then you have to kind of match what do you have in your backing, let's say your gold or your Bitcoin, with how many DBCs are in circulation.
Okay, so it can involve that too. Okay, interesting. I guess could it hypothetically be backed by Bitcoin then? And I guess one point I want to make clear to the listeners, or have you explicate is that there's no blockchain here. It's not proof of work. It's not proof of stake. It's not a cryptocurrency as it's not a cryptocurrency as most people would understand that today, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's none of that. It's just a value transfer system.
Okay. Value transfer system. Okay. And So you mentioned that it could be backed by gold or silver. I mean, so I guess it can overlap with other commodities as well. So gold, silver, could it possibly be backed by Bitcoin? I mean, is there any role that Bitcoin could play in this system, or is there any role that Scrit plays that could play for Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's actually one of the most common questions, and we put it in the white paper as well. Just to give you a bit of a background, so basically Scrit sits on that layer above the backing and below governance. So the governance would be, okay, how do we actually add new mints or remove mints? And the backing would be something like Bitcoin. And like I already said, to do anything with a DBC, you need a quorum of mints. So you would have n mints, let's say 15, and you would have a quorum, let's say 10. And then always, at least 10 mints have to sign a DBC in order for it to be valid. And you could use a backing with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and actually map that to a multi-signature address. And then each mint would have one signing key. And then basically you do multi-sig transactions. So the only limit that would be there right now with Bitcoin is that the multi-signature transactions are limited to an N of 15. That's the maximum number of N in Bitcoin right now. With Schnorr signatures, that would change. Then you could have higher numbers of N.
Okay, so basically you could only have 15 mints, and she'd only have 15 signatures. Is that what you're saying? At least until Schnorr.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the current maximum for a Bitcoin-backed Scrit, and the reason that's the maximum is because of the limitation of multi-signature addresses.
Okay, gotcha.
Bitcoin, and with Schnorr, that would be basically unlimited.
Okay, makes sense.
And there are other cryptocurrencies where you could already do that because they already have Schnorr built in. So, but with Bitcoin, right now it's still limited.
Okay.
But that's obviously a very very interesting use case to have a Scrit backed by Bitcoin. That would be quite interesting if somebody would set that up.
Yeah,
because then
I agree.
you would have the the backing or the store value properties of Bitcoin combined with a very fast, cheap, and anonymous payment system. So that's very desirable in my book.
So I guess I mean it sounds like so it kind of sounds like it's we're talking about layer technologies like with Bitcoin. You have Bitcoin, then you have Lightning as layer 2. Is that kind of how would Scrit then be like another layer 2 to Bitcoin? Would it be, I mean I'm just a thought that came to mind.
No, actually, that's absolutely right. You could consider it a layer 2 technology. It's just not limited to Bitcoin. You could have other backings like you said, cash or gold, or you could also think of a Scrit without any backing. Then it wouldn't really be a layer 2 technology. But in that case we discussed, it's a layer 2 technology for sure.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. So, and I'm just kind of asking the general questions that someone might have for another cryptocurrency. Well, how is it secured? So yeah, obviously Bitcoin has miners that secure the network. For Scrit, I take it the security of the overall network is provided by the mints when they check their spend books against double spends. Are they kind of the security of the system?
Exactly. So the mints themselves, they check the spend books. That's how they prevent double spends, and the whole system is designed that it would always require a quorum of mints to collude in order to, for example, create money out of thin air or to do any kind of harm. So the higher the quorum is, the higher the security is in that sense.
Gotcha.
And that's what I kind of hinted at with the Sybil attack. So let's say with the example of the NS15, MS10, that would require M-mints to collude. But you have to make sure that you have to kind of control who the mints are. Otherwise, if people could just join, you could create a majority of mints and then do harm. So that's on the governance layer quite a hard problem, how to prevent that. It's similar, let's say, to Tor. Sybil attacks basically means that an attacker controls enough nodes in a network to do harm, and it's very hard to prevent if you can just join. So, for example, in Tor, if you happen to get to have a route through Tor, which goes only through nodes controlled by the NSA, then Tor is useless for you.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And it looks like we got for anyone that's new that may be new to the live stream, this is another episode of the Vonu Podcast. I'm joined by Frank Braun, and going back to the chat here, Rob has a good question here about backing. He asks, how would someone confirm the backing in gold, for example, and how do you envision the gold being secured for the holders of the bearer notes? Is it basically just the users have to trust the mints, or what's the question mark?
It's basically it's a separate question to Scrit. Scrit is just the payment system. Then you have to think of, okay, how do you actually secure the backing? And there are multiple models for that. One would be that you have an audited backing somewhere which is insured, and then you have basically an auditor saying, okay, there's really that much gold in the vault, and then you have to map that to how many DBCs are in circulation, and to make sure there are not more DBCs than there's actual gold. So
Gotcha.
It's a hard problem. So
yeah, that gets
because
down.
You want to prevent a single point of failure in the backing as well. So if you have one entity that holds all the gold, obviously that's the biggest problem, especially if the state wants to take it down. You could also do a distributed backing where every mint has some gold, but like I said, you kind of have to. You need auditors who actually check, is the gold there. Ideally, you want to have it insured, and you have to match the amount of gold to the amount of DBCs. Make sure that there's no over-issuing. But the issuing also requires a quorum of mints to conclude.
Gotcha.
But right now we really are just focused on building the actual payment technology and not try not to solve all the problems at once. Otherwise, we will never get done.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I haven't
that makes
thought that much about how would we make the perfect gold backing. Although I really love the idea of having one. I think that would be a really great backing for Scrit. Because you don't really want to have a dollar backing, right? If you have
right.
gold would give you a lot of price stability without the inflation risk of fiat. So I think that's actually one of the best ways to do a backing. But since you're dealing with physical money, it's hard to do.
Yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind for me. Is gold. Yeah, gold's a lot more difficult because it requires it's there's actually something physical there, and it's worth a lot. So it's hard to store and secure. Obviously the state's known to confiscate things, and especially when it comes to monetary things. So we've got another question here from Rob. He said, what is the main advantage of Scrit Cash compared to other cryptos? Is it just speed or something else?
Well, the speed is much higher, so you have confirmation in like a second or so. Final confirmation. It's very cheap to operate, so you don't have this like blockchain mining process, which is expensive. You don't have like a huge blockchain which you have to store. The spent books they can be rotated because your signing keys they rotate, and so that you don't have this ever-growing ledger. And the biggest advantage is that you have you have a very high anonymity because you have used blind signatures, so you cannot distinguish one DBC from another DBC if it's in the same denomination. So basically, it's like unmarked dollar bills.
Gotcha. So I guess a question that just popped in my head. I guess does the architecture of Scrit, like with Bitcoin, obviously we talked about how unfortunately the exchanges are kind of a choke point. I mean most people buy on exchanges, and so some of Bitcoin. Someone could argue is some of it's tied into what I'd call the first realm banking infrastructure. Do you see Scrit as being more immune to that sort of thing? Say for example, in a year or two, say Scrit becomes pretty popular. Is architecture constructed in such a way as to make it more I guess invulnerable to that sort of thing? Could you speak to that?
I think that doesn't have anything to do with Scrit itself. It's a general problem, and for Scrit to be successful, you would need ways to buy into it, ideally with cash, like over-the-counter exchanges, and the same for Bitcoin. That's also what would help Bitcoin a lot if more people were able to buy and sell Bitcoin for cash. I mean, you mentioned BISC, that's going in that direction. There are also like Bitcoin ATMs and things like that. And it's basically the same problem for Scrit and for other cryptocurrencies. What I think is really important, though, is that you are able to exchange cryptocurrencies with other cryptocurrencies. So then the question only becomes, okay, how do you get in and out of the whole cryptocurrency ecosystem? And you asked earlier about Bitcoin, like what role I see in Bitcoin. I think one of the biggest advantages right now we have with Bitcoin is that it's the biggest cryptocurrency and it has the most infrastructure. So a lot of other technologies in the space, they can kind of piggyback on, I don't know if it's the right term, but hook up to Bitcoin when they're exchangeable to it. So but the problems with interfacing with the first realm, they're always the same.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I guess the way to bypass that problem altogether is, as you said. I mean, the problem is going from fiat to Bitcoin or fiat, say, to Scrit. The problem's not going from Bitcoin to Litecoin or Bitcoin to Scrit. That's not the problem. That's pretty easy to do without KYC and AML. The problem is, going from fiat to crypto. So the solution then is to, build up that alternative economy, build up that agora, to where, you don't need to go back and forth because you can just spend your crypto, spend your Scrit, spend your Bitcoin. I think that's
Exactly.
that's a solution. That's the solution, because it's going to be hard. I mean, we're not going to be able to strip away, the KYC and AML laws. The solution is to build around them and make them irrelevant.
Exactly. You kind of have to build up your parallel infrastructure. And with Scrit, the project kind of started that we wanted like a payment system for our toilets in the TAZ. And then we wanted to build the ultimate shitcoin. And kind of design kind of escalated from there. But there, the part of the vision is, okay, you go to a TAZ or to go to a place like Parallel, Neapolis and Prague, and you buy Scrit and with fiat, and then you're in the system and you use it to pay for a toilet or for coffee or to buy something. And then you can kind of circumvent all these KYC AML problems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So, got another question in chat here. It's more so a Bitcoin question, but certainly related to what we've been talking about. Bruno Ray asks, the lack of fungibility of Bitcoin frightens me. Do you think XMR is fulfilling the role of digital cash more so than other currencies?
If XMR fills the role of what?
Do you think that XMR is fulfilling the role of digital cash more so than other currencies?
Well, Monero is certainly one of the best contenders we have right now in terms of anonymous cryptocurrencies. It's still not as anonymous as you could make it with something like Scrit, like with DBCs, which are way more anonymous due to blind signatures. I really like Monero because it has this improved privacy aspect, but the usability is it's tough. So it's very resource intensive, and usually once you do a transaction, all the money from that address, so to speak, is locked until the transaction confirms. So which makes it kind of hard to do a lot of repeat payments.
Yeah, and that's the hurdle that I used to. I never really cared much about altcoins. I speculated and traded them for like 6 months back in 2016, but up until I guess it was last year. So last year, midway through last year, Monero was the only one I cared about, and it was because the privacy thing. But you mentioned the usability. They're hard forks every 6 months or however long they are. Issues with the wallet, so I just kind of gave up on Monero just from being super difficult to get my money out. But still early on in this thing. So I guess I'm curious about this part of his question too. Are you worried about the lack of fungibility in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a problem. And we already talked about Samurai and Wasabi improving that, and I think we recently had this discussion on Twitter. But let's mix all the coins, make them more fungible that way. We might run into a situation that exchanges actually flag coins that have been mixed and prevent you from exchanging them. That will show if to what extent we have a fungibility problem in Bitcoin. I think from what I've heard, it already happens when you, let's say, have deposit money to an exchange like Coinbase from a darknet market, but it could also happen that when you mix coins, that they refuse to take them, or they want more proof where you got the coins from. It's unclear how it will develop, but it is the way the basic technology is built. It is problematic, the fungibility in Bitcoin, because you can differentiate the coins or the UTXOs.
And I hadn't thought about that additional step. That's yeah. I know that's yeah, like the exchanges can blacklist addresses and such, but I didn't realize that they could identify what transactions have been mixed and block those addresses as well. Um, okay. Yeah, that's another interesting hurdle.
That's kind of trivial to do. I mean, if you have this massive coin join like in Wasabi with 100 U2XOs, then yeah, it's quite easy to detect it on the blockchain and when a transaction is incoming.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting.
That's why the response was, okay, let's pump all coin through these mixers. Then they're all tainted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another another interesting problem I hadn't thought of. So for Scrit, we've talked about this a little bit, but in the white paper, the governance model talks about Codechain. So could we talk a little bit about Codechain and then also tie that into Scrit, how it could be, I guess, a possible use for the governance?
Sure. So like I said, Scrit basically has these three layers. You have the backing layer, which is not part of Scrit. Then you have Scrit as the actual payment system, and then you have the governance layer, which is kind of on top of Scrit, which kind of has to deal with the question: how do we add mints to a system, or how do we remove them? How do the mints coordinate? Because in Scrit, the mints have to coordinate. For example, if they want to create new money, the mints have to coordinate, and also for adding and removing them. So we've been thinking about that, and at some point I realized that we could just use Codechain for a first version, which gives you all that functionality. Basically with manual interactions of the mints. There might be better governance models or more elaborate ones where mints could, buy in to become a mint. But with Scrit, with Codechain, we basically have a drop-in solution that we can just use for governance. So I guess then I have to explain what Codechain actually is, right?
Right. Yeah.
So Codechain tries to solve the problem that when you install software, install source code, how can you actually trust the source code? And so there are multiple problems with that. So one problem is, one common solution is, okay, you sign it. People have a PGP key and they sign it, right? Mm-hmm. So then you manually verify. Let's say with Wasabi, you have it, you download it, and on the website it says it has to be signed by this PGP key, and then you verify it manually. And the big problem with that approach is you have first of all, you have to do it manually, the verification. The second one is you have only one signer. So there is a party that you could potentially force to sign a release which has a backdoor.
Right.
It's a single person or a single developer holding the key. And the third problem is, how do you make sure that if you have an update, that everybody who downloads the update or a new version of the software actually gets the same version and everybody gets the update? Because let's say you find a backdoor, or a bug in a software, you make an update, but if you could suppress the update to certain people, that would be a problem. Or if you could give a version with a backdoor to just one person, that would also be a problem. So you want to make sure that everybody who installs your software gets the same version, gets all the updates, and you kind of want to remove this bottleneck or this security problem of having just one person to sign a release. So and basically that's what Codechain does. It gives you a single source of truth, how you can you can find out there's a new version, and you cannot really censor that. Everybody gets the same information. You have an ability to automatically detect that and create updates, and it is it's a multi-party signature. It's a bit like a multi-signature address in Bitcoin. You have multiple developers signing updates and signing changes.
Gotcha.
And then
okay.
you define a quorum, so similar to Scrit. So you have you need M signatures and you have N developers. So and that is kind of stored in a data structure where you cannot later change anything, and you can always see, okay, what developer signed an update, and enforce that there are at least, let's say, 2 developers having to sign an update.
Gotcha.
Was that clear so far?
Yes, yes, that makes perfect sense. So with scripts, it's the same idea with the mints, that once you have a quorum, then they can verify the transaction without double spends. Only in this case with Codechain, we're talking about like, for example, like let's say I've got this project called Darklands, which I do have. This project, it's on hiatus, but I've got this project Darklands where it's going to be on GitLab. We need something like Codechain. Basically, the purpose of Codechain would be instead of just one developer signing a key, there'd be a quorum of developers that are authenticating verifying the authenticity of whatever is in question. Correct?
Yeah. So they sign off the changes. So it is a distributed or a multi-party code review system with signatures. And once you install a software which is protected by Codechain, it can automatically check for updates. If there is an update, it can download them and then can verify that enough developers have signed the update, and then just basically recompile a new version of the software. I didn't go into the technical details. It's probably too much for the show, but that's the general idea and the problems that it solves. And then we kind of realized, okay, that maps very well to the problem we have in Scrit.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we coordinate a set of N mints where M of them have to agree? And basically, we just map the N mints to N signers in Codechain. And then we create a Codechain repository, which is kind of like there's one repository for the Scrit code, but there's another one for the actual Scrit currency, so to speak. And for that repository, every mint has a signing key. And if they want to add a new mint, they just change the configuration file, and then at least M of these mints have to sign the Codechain with the configuration. And once enough of them signed, the configuration can safely be updated, and you just added a new mint.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I've read actually printed out and read the white paper, and it was pretty clear. I will say it was pretty clear, but I have a hard time. I'm not a programmer developer. I'm not super proficient in math equations and the like. So I have a hard time, I guess, grasping the entire architecture. But yeah, has certainly helped, and I will drop a link, and definitely in the show notes of the podcast when it's released. But I will drop a link to the Scrit white paper there in the show notes as well. And yeah, I do recommend reading it. So we've got Scrit Cash and Codechain. I mean, so we've got we've got the white paper for Scrit Cash. When we'll be able to use that? I mean, when will there be, I guess, an alpha or beta release or something along those lines?
Well, we hope to get a prototype of the Scrit system running in first quarter of next year, but since it's kind of like our side project, it depends how quickly we get along, but
Sure.
as quickly as possible. So
Sure.
we kind of adopted this open development process, so that we put out the white paper draft, and we will put out all the code we develop, so people can comment on it and see what's happening. But it's right at this stage, it's a private side project, so we don't have any funding or some ICO plant or stuff like that. So it's hard to tell when it's be done, you know.
Okay.
But,
very good. And what about Codechain? Is that could that be used right now? Is it ready to go?
It's basically ready to go. Yeah, I have to add one more feature, but it's very immature.
Okay. Very
Which
cool.
is why we kind of realize, okay, we want to use that for Scrit, then, because then we have a working governance solution which works for the first version without us having to write any other code. So it kind of ended up being it's a nice abstraction that kind of fits well together. So I was very happy when I realized that, because that meant that we created the right abstraction in Codechain because it was so easily reusable.
Right, and I mean, you had to work on Codechain anyway. It's you had to work on Codechain anyway. So if it was a part of Scrit, then you had even more of a reason to work on it, get it done. So
Yeah.
makes sense. So I guess was there anything else you wanted to mention in regards to Scrit Cache or Codechain? I got a couple of listener questions I wanna work in if you've got more time.
I don't have anything to add. Hit me up with the questions.
Okay, very good. So I will start with there's a question from Jadaniel Richer on Twitter. He asks, how can someone make the transition from running around with their real name to using a NIM? So I guess the transition from a given name to a pseudonym.
You just start over. You just create a NIM and go from there. Or does he mean in real life? Or?
Yeah, I think he's talking more so like probably physical space and time, going from first realm to second realm. But yeah, that's probably more so what he was getting at. But yeah, as far as pseudonyms, you just kind of you just create new pseudonyms whenever you need them, right? Whenever you want one. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah. I mean, there's no limit on the number of pseudonyms you can use, but it takes some practice to separate them well. So for the online world, it's very helpful if you actually set up a different machine for it, or at least a different virtual machine, so you don't end up mixing your NIMs. It happens very easily when let's say you write an email and then suddenly you use the wrong NIM. That would be my tip in that area. And for the physical world, you should really limit the number of NIMs you use, because otherwise things become very complicated. But in general, it is a lot easier than people think. It's basically you come up with your NIM and then you use it. And when you meet somebody, you tell them your name. And they don't really think about if it's like a NIM or if it's your legal name or whatever it is. And even if they met you before, sometimes if you tell them a different name, they will just think, okay, they remembered the wrong name.
Right.
It's not that much of a big deal. It's more of a psychological problem, I think, because we're so used to having our name, and that is some sort of obligation that you have to always say your legal name, but you can just make up any name, and it's just a matter of consistently using it.
Right. Sounds good. Another question here is from Paralleli Polis. It's not the one from Prague. I think it was maybe a different location. But anyway, it's on Twitter. But how do you come to terms with being a public crypto advocate when crypto means hidden? Was this question?
Okay. Well, that was kind of hard to get used to. I tried to be very hidden for a long time, and I gave some talks, but I didn't have them recorded. I didn't do any podcasts or didn't talk much on Twitter. But at some point, I figured that I kind of want to bring the message out, and that kind of requires to be more in the public. And therefore, compromise a bit. Let's put it that way. Compromise a bit on being like in the hidden, and that's how I solved the problem. So it's basically for the course, so to say. And I can still do things online with a different NIM if I want to. That's just my NIM I use in public, or in public basically as a online and offline persona. And but I totally respect it, and I totally get it when some people don't want to do that. It's just what I wanted to do to bring the message out a bit more.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Yeah, because as obviously, obviously, the security culture is very, very important. But at the same time, we're social animals, and then there's also the altruistic part, at least in some of us, where we want to spread the message and all that stuff. So it's a fine line, right? Trying to determine how much you want to disclose versus how much what to keep private.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something you always have to work on finding the right balance. But maybe let me add one thing. I think it is very important that we build like these real connections, and building real connections means that you have to meet people in the physical space, and build friendships and all of that. It's great to be on Twitter, and it's also great to be on like a live podcast, but it's also very important that you actually build relationships in the physical realm with people you meet regularly and can talk to. And that's sometimes kind of hard to find like-minded people if you're completely hidden, right? It kind of requires that you go to let's say a TAZ or to a conference and actually meet people. You can still be private, but you kind of have to expose yourself a little bit in order to connect, and also in order to build like spaces of more freedom. We cannot build them alone, so
Right.
It kind of requires that you go out if you want to do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's that's one thing I loved coming across the Second Realm content was that had been my focus for like a year and a half or 2 years before that point, was how do we increase our personal freedom in the here and now in physical space and time. And I love your emphasis and just the Second Realm emphasis on not only having these protected spaces in digital space, but also in physical space and time. Because it's crucially important. Life's too short to be a slave, and it's some folks like Rayo, the founder of Vonu, he really did like his isolation, but for a lot of people, there is that inclination to work with others, and there's also the economic advantage of division of labor and things of that nature. So yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, I like that emphasis on the physical.
Sure. And then we just have to figure out basically how can we solve that dilemma, how can we meet in the physical realm and still maintain privacy. And that's what Second Realm is a lot about, to solve these problems, create physical spaces which are still unobservable and where you cannot attribute actions.
Right.
But we have to solve that problem. We cannot just stay in the virtual realm.
Right. Yeah, totally with you. So the last question I have for you is from CoinShare, and there's it was a few tweets. So I'll read it in its entirety here. So he says, being a privacy extremist to the extent you practice is somewhere between logistically extremely inconvenient and impossible for most of the population, especially as more infrastructure and semi-infrastructure, such as the phone app you use to communicate with your mother, become reliant on biometrics or KYC. How would you or others articulate the gray area between complete ignorance and perfect OPSEC? And what are some overarching principles to help gradually navigate from an interested noob to someone taking meaningful action that benefits themselves and others? I guess I can break up that question, break it up into individual questions here for you. So his first one was, how would you or others articulate the gray area between complete ignorance and perfect OPSEC? So I guess the fine line between privacy and also complete ignorance.
Well, I think there are like a few general principles you can apply there, and one of them is, we already touched on it, is like compartmentalization. And like what I mentioned, you can create different NIMs and you have separate computers for them, and that also kind of translates into the physical space. He's totally right that it's becoming more and more. It's becoming harder and harder to maintain privacy, and that also means it becomes very expensive, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of time, which kind of translates to money, but because it makes you more inefficient. And one way to deal with that is that you kind of have to choose in what areas you want to maintain high privacy and in what areas you don't want to maintain that because it's too costly. For example, when you're calling your mom or your grandmother, you're probably not going to talk about anything very sensitive. So it's not necessarily necessary that you have this extreme privacy stance when you call her. And in other areas, it's a different situation. So I think that is something to keep in mind. And to get started, I think it already helps a lot when you kind of go through the world with that mindset of what data is collected here, how can this be tied to you. Usually a lot of data collection is tied to identifiers. For example, phone numbers, email addresses, of course your legal name, and just kind of start with that open mind. Okay, how is the data collected, and how could I get around this, and get in the habit of use the low-hanging fruit. For example, pay with. I mean, it's so obvious, but pay with cash instead of credit card when you can, every time you can. Get used to that. Things like, okay, public transport tickets. Go for the one that is anonymous. Don't go for the one that ties your name to it. Stuff like that. But it kind of actually brings it back to Scrit a little bit, which is part of our vision for Scrit is not just to have human to human payments, but I think what we need in the future a lot is human to machine payments, and we can see that already. That this area is very problematic in from a privacy perspective, because a lot of these services you simply cannot use without giving them all your data. For example, let's say Uber. It's very, very hard to use Uber without giving up personal information. And one of the reasons is that the payment system is not anonymous. Once you have an anonymous payment system, you could use it anonymously.
Right. Yeah, and I guess there are a couple things that came to mind there. You were mentioning how just kind of being in, just I guess the first thing is just being in that mindset. Just thinking, like, I guess just being conscious. Conscious of all of the way that your data is constantly being exploited. That alone, like I know, like, especially in the past year, I've thought about that with basically everything that I do is, well, how could my data be used here? How could this be hacked? Questions I wouldn't normally ask myself, I guess, a few years back. So yeah, I think you're right that just being in that mindset and being conscious of the fact that every company out there is going to sell my data. My data is very vulnerable. I have to start protecting it. So yeah, I think just being in that mindset is super important.
Yeah. And often, like, consider things public when you say them in public, or when you use software that isn't like highly protective of your data, that's kind of like why I prefer Twitter over Facebook, because Facebook has all these privacy settings, and that's complete bullshit. You should consider everything on Facebook public, and So with Twitter, that it's a little bit clearer that it's all public.
Sure.
Of course, you should also consider all the private messages public.
Yeah, that's basically if it's connected to the internet, if it's connected to the internet, just assume the worst is if it seems to be best practice. Yeah.
I mean, there's good software, I mean, I'm not saying that everything is public, right? I mean, let's say
sure.
Signal
Well,
is
yeah,
pretty
of
good.
course, yeah.
But yeah, that generally is a good rule of thumb, I think, to consider these things public.
Yeah. Sure. So I guess another thing that came to mind, just as you were talking about pseudonyms and compartmentalization, and I brought this up to Smuggler, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it too. But I guess I used to have this conception of the second realm lifestyle as, well, I guess, yeah, it's kind of a lifestyle. Yeah, my conception was that hardcore second realmers only exist in the second realm. Like, they don't have any vestiges of their first realm lives. But it seems like after talking to Smuggler and kind of maybe getting just a better feel for this, it seems like there's for obviously depending on the individual, there's more overlap than others, but it seems like there's a lot of interaction between both realms, just by virtue of existing.
Yeah, definitely overlap, I think, and it is extremely expensive when you try to be 100% in the second realm right now. I mean, hopefully, if our strategy is successful, that price will go down, because we will have these spaces where we can have privacy more easily. But right now, the price is extremely high, and it's only getting higher. So that's also, I think, a good mindset to think about. Think about, okay, you're like a criminal who wants to flee the country. Somebody's after you. Just try thinking how you would live, how you would transact business, how you would travel, and it quickly becomes apparent that it's extremely hard these days. Right. And also that makes it extremely expensive.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. So
you kind of, if you want to have any sort of effectiveness in building, more freedom, you kind of have to also maintain like this first realm identity and do business in that area. I think there's no way around that right now.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I certainly agree. So I've got another question in chat here from Rob. He asks, how do you screen new members and avoid infiltration, I guess, of temporary autonomous zones from potential enemies and bludgies and others? And this is a great question. I'd love to get, especially folks that, like you and Smuggler, that are super focused on security. I guess, yeah, vetting question. How do you vet new members and prevent infiltration from enemies? What are some strategies that you employ?
That's a very good question. Problem is, in order to maintain good OPSEC, I cannot give you the details because that would be bad OPSEC. But I can give you some general principles. First of all, that if you kind of build this alternative structure, organization, the same principle of compartmentalization applies. It doesn't mean that if you have a group of people building something, that every member of that group has to know everything. It's also there's this principle of need to know. So that's some technique to limit the amount of damage somebody could do. What I find helpful is to generally, when you meet people, kind of see, do they have some sort of history? And does that history check out? So, and also ask friends, people who know that person already. You can ask them about that person if they really know them for long. And And I would also, listen to my gut feeling. That's, I think, very important as well.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Let me take a look back at chat here and see if there's any other questions.
Maybe one more thing to add is,
Sure, go ahead.
you kind of have to build a trust. Kind of grows over time and is destroyed in an instant. So and you kind of you know what I mean, like you takes a lot of transaction with somebody and interactions and listening and talking to him to go to a high trust level.
Right.
And it just takes one fraud, one theft, one big lie for trust to be destroyed. So and I think there's just no way around that, which is also important to understand for yourself, that it's if you want to build these kind of relationships, you have to be honest with your peers and keep your agreements.
Yeah.
Because that's how they build trust in you, and you can really easily destroy that trust. And if you really destroy that trust, then there's no way of ever rebuilding it. At least that's how I see it. If somebody really, let's say if a friend of mine would steal from me, then it would not be my friend anymore. And there's he cannot really solve that problem.
Right.
Make up for it,
Yeah. It's the importance of reputation. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, and how easy it is to disappear. But yeah, Rob has got a couple more comments here. He says, we are a small group of people building something similar to an autonomous zone, and the OPSEC question is our biggest problem because we want to open up to outsiders eventually. We are considering personality tests, lie detector tests, and other means. Do you have any experience with using any of these things that you'd like to disclose, of course?
I didn't hear what you said about what things.
He said we're considering personality tests, lie detector tests, and other means. Do you have any experience with using any of those things that you'd like to disclose, of course?
No, I don't really have experience with that, and we never used any lie detectors. I don't think I would use them. I have a kind of like personal interest in personality tests because I find them very interesting, and always want to know the Myers-Briggs type of people I talk to. But I don't think that's really something you can use to screen people. No.
Okay. No. Okay. Very good. Very good. So the answer.
I think it's a lot about is somebody philosophically a fit, and I think you can kind of see that over time if the person is honest in that sense,
Yeah.
Let's say if liberty is really something you care about in your life, that kind of shows, and it's kind of hard to fake for a very long time. So especially being emotional about things like that. So.
Right. Yeah. I've found in my, I mean, granted it's been in the alternative media and content creation and podcasting, but yeah, I mean it's pretty easy to tell who's serious, right? Who's serious about freedom and who's not. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree.
I think you can see that as well. You can see that a bit as a case study, for example, in the cryptocurrency area. With Bitcoin in the early days, there was a lot of people who were in it for good reasons, to get rid of fiat money or to create private payment system. A lot of good reasons, and you could tell that they were honest about it. I don't agree with every strategy or every technology that has been developed, but most of the people in the early days, they were honest. And then later there was a lot of people coming onto the scene that were just in it for the money or for fame, and you can usually tell that very easily. So
yeah.
And I think it's the same when you're trying to build a group that you can kind of feel that and see that if somebody is actually interested and honest about liberty and building an alternative, or if it's somebody for whom it is just a hype, or maybe it's an agent. It's really hard to maintain that over a long time. And actually, this whole surveillance society makes it also a lot harder for the other side, because where do you get an informant from who does not have a huge history of social media usage?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, you study law, or you're like become a policeman or something like that, and then later you want to become an informant. How do you erase that history of yourself and create this 100% alternative history? That's really hard.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think there was one guy who asked a question. He has it on his Twitter that he's an ex-cop, and that's the only way how to deal with it in an honest way, right? That actually gives him credibility that he says he's an ex-cop, because if he wouldn't say that, then it's very hard to hide that fact.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like it's much better if he says, "Yeah, I'm an ex-cop and I regret my past." Yeah, that's better than trying to hide it. For sure. So Rob dropped a message in another message here, and it's not a question, but I'll read it and just open it up to you for comment. He says, yes, but if you don't have your advantage mobility to move, in a worst case scenario, it is hard because the risk is so high to lose it all. If you get infiltrated by the wrong person, it really only takes one bad reporter, for example. Yeah, that's the tough thing about building physical temporary autonomous zones, right? Is that there is always that small risk of infiltration.
Yeah, sure, but it's also, the question is, what are you actually doing there? And there are like different levels of crime, so to say.
Sure.
And it really depends a lot on where you are, in what jurisdiction you are, how the authorities act there, what you're actually doing. Do you sell Bitcoin for cash and then sell coffee and don't report the taxes, or are you running a math lab? That's a very different thing. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, you cannot generalize the answer there, I think.
Right.
To how to maintain security and OPSEC in these situations.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, certainly a tough field. Certainly a tough field. But I don't see any other questions in chat. It's been about an hour, coming up on an hour and a half. So I guess we can begin to close out here. Do you have any closing thoughts for the listeners on what we talked about today? Crypto-anarchy, second realms. Any general closing thoughts for the listeners?
No, I think, like I said, it's very important to ask yourself, how can you create more freedom for yourself and for the people that are close to you? I think that's a very important principle. I think often people try to build like these large solutions that solve everything, and it's great to aspire to do that, but I think there's also a lot of things we can improve and gain by trying to build like local solutions and start in our direct environment. And maybe that's my call to action in that area. Try to improve your local community and your local relationships.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect way to end. Perfect way to end. That's exactly what we advocate here on the Vonu podcast. Is radical lifestyle changes in pursuance of freedom. So that's the idea. Well, Frank, it's been a pleasure, man. Great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Just taking one more look at chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope. We're good. I appreciate you coming on, man. If people want to keep up with your work, where should they go?
I'm on basically all my links on frankbraun.org. That's Braun, so the German spelling. I'm also on Twitter at the Frank Braun. And yeah, I guess you're gonna link to the stuff anyway. I also want to thank you. Thanks a lot for having me on the show, and I really appreciate your work. And keep doing what you're doing, man.
Hey, I appreciate that, Frank. I really do. And you guys do too. I mean, I said this to Smuggler, but when I came across Anarplex.net and came across the Second Realm content and hashtag Agora, I mean, that was it was huge. It was very, very important. Put out I remember I think it was a 15, 16 part series on called Building the Second Realm on the other podcast I used to do. So I mean, all this stuff that you guys are doing is super, super important, and I'm doing as much as I can to get the strategy of building Second Realms, building Tazes, doing as much as I can to push it out there, to get people out of political crusading and get people out of these strategies that will lead to nowhere but wasted time, effort, or even counterproductive in terms of politics. So I appreciate all the work that you do, and please keep doing it.
Thanks, man. Glad to hear that it had some impact. I remember Smuggler telling me that he found your 16-part series on the internet and had no idea who you were. So it kind of showed me that sometimes it's good to put out content, and you never know who will find it and who can resonate with it. So,
indeed,
yeah,
indeed. Well, Frank, thanks a lot, man. I'd love to have you back on in the future.
Sure, absolutely. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Frank. You have a good one. So, all right, guys, that's all I have for you today. Big thanks to Frank for coming on the show, and thank you for tuning in. I sure hope you found the discussion as valuable as I did. I mean, yeah, Frank, Smuggler, those hardcore crypto-anarchists, cypherpunks that are out there doing shit, out there doing real shit, like really, really important stuff. So, hopefully you found it valuable. Of course, share the podcast around, share the live stream. Well, the live stream's over, but yeah, share the link to watch around, and make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcatcher. We sure do appreciate it. And I think that's all I have for you. Until next time, let's build the Agora, and let's build Second Realms.